Good day, this is Len Lazarick with MarylandReporter.com, and today we're going to be talking about gun control. With us today are Delegate Mike McDermott from the Lower Eastern Shore. Mike, in his alternate life, is actually a law enforcement officer, a lieutenant with the Sheriff's Department in Worcester County, is it?
Yes, sir.
And on the other side, we have Vinny DeMarco, famous lobbyist. Today he is representing Maryland's for handgun control, correct?
Marylanders to prevent gun violence.
Okay, thank you very much. There is another group that has a name like that. In any case, all right, now that I've gotten their title screwed up, we're going to start a discussion about why do we need a bill like this?
Well, we need the bill the governor proposed because it will save lives, Len. The main part of this bill requires that people who purchase a handgun have to get a license first from the state police and go through a fingerprint process, background check, and safety training. States that have these kind of measures and have had them for decades have dramatically lower gun deaths than Maryland does. And that's because in states that have these kind of measures, people can't lie in a background check and get a gun when they shouldn't get it, and people don't buy guns for criminals. Law enforcement leaders, including state's attorneys, police chiefs, have come to the legislature urging that this be enacted because they know that so many guns that are used to kill people originate in gun stores from straw purchases when someone buys a gun for a criminal. And if you enact this law, you will save many lives. And we also need to ban assault weapons.
Mike, don't we have a lot of these provisions already, the background checks?
Maryland has a very extensive process by which you must acquire a regulated firearm. So we regulate handgun sales. We regulate everything that's on the list. In fact, if it's not on the list, you can't buy it in Maryland. And there is a background check if you want to buy a handgun. It's a process. There are multiple forms that you have to fill out. And it has to be a 7-day waiting period.
Isn't there some fingerprinting involved?
There's no fingerprinting right now, unless you are trying to get a carry permit.
Right.
If you're just trying to purchase the firearm to take home and have at your home, there is no fingerprinting involved. However, there is verification of the individual. You have to provide, generally speaking, a Maryland driver's license. You have to prove who you are, and the state police then receive those forms, and they conduct their own background check to ensure that you are not a disqualified individual. And then they sign off on the form and send it back, and then you're allowed to pick the weapon up.
Are you opposed to all aspects of this law or proposed law from the governor, or are there some things that you can support that are in?
There's a lot in the governor's law, the bill, that 281, the Senate bill, that probably can be viewed from a holistic perspective. The mental health issues that are in the bill, I think a lot of folks can find agreement on both sides of the aisle. There are some aspects when it comes to background checks, making sure that the background checks process is done competently and thoroughly. I think that we could probably look at that and have some agreement that we need to, perhaps we could do better in some of those areas. Not that we're doing a bad job now in Maryland, but can we do better? Yeah, I'm sure we probably could. That's something that we could look at. The thing where we find the least agreement is the barriers that the bill puts up between people and their right to keep and bear arms.
Well,
Go ahead.
It's great. I agree with the delegate that we have some good laws in Maryland. Maryland, unlike many states in the country, have universal background checks for handgun sales. You have to get a background check, either a gun store, a gun show, or individual sales, and that's great. However, states...
Which is not true on the federal level.
Which is not true at the federal level, and many states don't have that. And that's what we're trying to do at the federal level, have universal background checks, and I hope the delegate would support that nationally. But here in Maryland, we can do better because we know that there are other states like New York and New Jersey that have dramatically lower gun deaths, because when you require someone to first go to the state police and get a fingerprint background check, that will deter someone from getting a gun who is not a criminal from getting a gun for a criminal, and that's how many guns get into the illegal hands. And that's why, Len, 80% of Marylanders, including 64% of Republicans, support licensing. It makes sense, and Maryland can show the rest of the country that if we do this, we can substantially reduce gun deaths like these other states are doing.
This is not a new issue for you. As a matter of fact, you started your public advocacy career on gun control, right?
I worked on this issue in 1988 when we passed a landmark law banning Saturday night specials, sustained it in a referendum, and that saved a lot of lives. But this law will be the culmination of all that work.
Why are your constituents so opposed to this? I mean, you've heard from thousands of constituents.
Sure. You know, because some of the proposals in the bill and some of the things that Mr. DeMarco would advocate simply have not proven over time that they actually do what he says they do. For instance, gun violence. Crime is down all across the country. I think we can all agree with that. Crime is down in Maryland in spite of the fact that we haven't changed the way that we go about this process. So to say that somehow these affect these numbers, the only number that I'm aware of that's affected relative to firearms are when people have the right to carry in their states, like Florida and Texas, places like that. Violence and crime goes down in those states in proportion to the people's ability to carry and protect themselves. Maryland has a very strict standard about allowing the right for people to carry their own private firearms on their person when they're out in public. And because of that, we don't realize the same benefits as some of these other states do.
Well,
and you'd like to loosen that up.
The fact of the matter is, states that have this fingerprint licensing for purchase have dramatically lower gun deaths. Some of the lowest gun deaths in the country, much lower than the states the delegate was mentioning. Dramatically lower because they prevent people from buying guns for criminals. And I just want to add, what the committee did last night in voting 7-4, the Judicial Proceedings Committee in favor of this legislation, is reduced some of the burdens that the delegate was talking about by cutting in half the cost of getting this license, which we're okay with. We think that's good. We don't want to burden legitimate gun owners at all.
Especially since the bill is actually going to raise some money for the state.
Well,
like
that was not right. I agree with you that it's good that the law will just cover its own cost. It's important that we do what works. New York City, let's take New York City for example. New York City has dramatically lower gun deaths. The state has dramatically lower gun deaths than Maryland. And in New York City, 85% of the guns used in crime come from out of state because people don't do straw purchases there.
But wasn't this New York stuff, wasn't this a big change in police tactics that they did?
And this is where we're going to differ. Mr. DeMarco may think that it's relative to laws that are passed, but what it is, it's relative to prosecution of bad guys. When you go after the bad guys, you will reduce crime, you will lock up people, you will not have people on the street that were committing crimes in the first place. So you're going to impact the gun violence. The gun violence has been impacted in Baltimore in a significant way. And that's not because we've passed laws, it's because of good and better police work and better technology, quite frankly. Also, technology-wise, we're saving more people's lives through places like Johns Hopkins, so we're not experiencing the deaths that perhaps we would or have experienced in the past, simply because people are being kept alive as opposed to being, just out there on the street and suffering, from the gunshot wound itself. So there's a lot of factors that are involved in whether or not our gun violence is up, down. I think we could all agree that gun violence in some areas of the country has risen. We have more people that are being impacted by it. The problem that I have with the bill is it will not address these issues. It will not limit gun violence in Maryland. It's not going to change anything. You can ban guns, you can restrict magazines, you can do anything you want relative to a particular firearm. You're not going to stop what we're dealing with in Baltimore City and our metropolitan areas. None of these provisions would have kept these kids from killing other kids in Prince George's County in the last 2 weeks. Nothing in the bill would have changed that whatsoever.
Well, the police chiefs from Baltimore City, Baltimore County, and Prince George's County and Montgomery County disagree with the delegate. They have come here saying this law will reduce gun violence in our state because, take for example, New Jersey. New Jersey has dramatically lower gun deaths than Maryland because they have this fingerprint licensing, and a state trooper from New Jersey was quoted in a newspaper here in Maryland saying that in New Jersey they don't have straw purchases. In other words, in New Jersey, people don't go into a gun shop to buy a gun for a criminal because they have to go through this state police fingerprint test. As a result, they have much lower deaths, and the deaths that occur in New Jersey occur because other states don't have this law. So we need that here.
The only thing that this would add, this fingerprinting, somehow folks believe that if you bring a person and you make an otherwise lawful citizen go in and be fingerprinted at the police department and add that to the process of them purchasing a firearm, somehow that's going to make them not sell the gun later on, as if the process that we have now is failed. The state police, they cannot point to facts and figures here in Maryland that support these contentions. So we listened to Dr. Webster from Johns Hopkins, funded by Bloomberg, and all the studies that they've done, which don't include Maryland, talk about these aspects. And we talked about, well, what is Maryland doing, and what is it that is being proposed that's going to be a game changer in Maryland? They can't point to it because statistically it just doesn't exist.
Well, yes, they can. Dr. Webster pointed out that the state of Missouri had this kind of fingerprint licensing system. They got rid of it. Their gun deaths went up. The straw purchases went up. States that have fingerprint licensing, like Governor O'Malley proposed, have dramatically fewer gun deaths. We should have that here in Maryland, too.
I think you could tell that on this long, complicated bill, these guys could go another half hour, but we're not going to do that. We're going to end right here, but you're going to be hearing and seeing a lot more about gun control over the next week, 2 weeks, months, unfortunately. Thanks for being with us today. This is MarylandReporter.com.
Thank you.